Captain Minho stood inside the communications room of the Tuyuk, staring at the endless stream of reports displayed across the holographic screens. The situation was worse than anyone had feared. 23 human colonies had been attacked by the Kuthrim. In the last year, hundreds of thousands were dead. Thousands more had been captured and harvested for biological material. And the worst part, the coalition had known. They had received the warnings. They had seen the distress signals. But they had done almost nothing. "They're still forming committees," Yuna said quietly, scrolling through the latest official response. Her voice was filled with frustration. "They want to study the situation, establish response protocols, and distribute resources through proper channels." She looked up. Estimated timeline, 6 to 8 months. The room went silent. Seojin stared at the display in disbelief. 6 to 8 months? He shook his head. How many colonies will be gone by then? No one answered, because everyone already knew. Captain Minho slowly turned away from the screens. For years, humanity had trusted the coalition. They believed the galaxy's greatest powers would protect the innocent. They believed cooperation mattered. But while diplomats debated and leaders delayed, people were dying. Minho made his decision, a decision that would change the future of humanity forever. He walked to the central communication console and opened a broadcast channel. Not a private channel, not a military frequency. A channel that reached every human colony, every human ship, and every human station across known space. Every human would hear his words, and so would the coalition. He didn't care. The transmission activated. "This is Captain Minho of the US Tayuk." His voice echoed across millions of receivers. "I'm transmitting on every frequency because what I have to say concerns every human being living among the stars." He paused. The bridge crew watched silently. 3 weeks ago, we received a distress call from a Velkari agricultural colony. His expression hardened. They were under attack. The Kathrim were harvesting them, taking their bodies for biomass. The room felt colder. The coalition received that same distress signal days before we did. Another pause. They had time. They had ships. They had the power to help. Minho looked directly into the camera. But they did nothing. Across the galaxy, billions of humans heard those words, and for the first time in generations, they realized they could no longer wait for someone else to save them. He uploaded the data Yuna had compiled. Attack patterns, casualty estimates, timestamps showing when the coalition had received distress calls and when they'd responded, if at all. The Kathrim are back. They're targeting remote colonies across the outer sectors. The coalition says they need time to organize a proper response. But while they debate procedures, people are dying. Species are being hunted to extinction. Minho's voice hardened. "I'm authorizing any human vessel, military or civilian, to engage Catherine forces on site. I'm calling for volunteers to patrol the outer colonies and provide protection until the coalition gets their act together. This isn't a military order. This is a request. Help me stop this." He ended the transmission and looked at his bridge crew. "That's probably the end of my career." "Worth it," Hyan said simply. The response was overwhelming. Within hours, the first ship started arriving. Within days, it became a flood. The Bususan runner was already there with Captain Unji. Now she was joined by dozens more cargo haulers, their civilian crews replaced by volunteers with military experience. They brought supplies, weapons, and most importantly, ships that could carry people to safety. A mining vessel called Deep Horizon arrived, captained by a grizzled old miner named Kiang Su. His ship's industrial equipment designed for cutting through asteroids could slice through Catherine bio-hour like paper. "Figured these cutting lasers might be useful," he said with a grin. "Plus, my crew's been itching for some excitement. Mining's boring. More ships kept coming. Patrol boats, survey vessels, even a few luxury yachts whose wealthy owners had decided adventure was better than safety. Each one brought crew members willing to fight. Major Tahan found himself commanding a force that grew every day. He established patrol routes covering the vulnerable colonies. He trained civilian volunteers in basic combat and evacuation procedures. He created a defensive network that covered hundreds of light years. This isn't a proper military structure, Lieutenant Curie pointed out. We have no unified command, no standardized equipment, no proper supply chain. No, Tahan agreed. It's a human military structure, decentralized, adaptive, and mean as hell. The Velkari colony became the unofficial headquarters of this growing armada. Doyen's engineering teams worked with volunteers from dozens of ships to create a supply depot and repair facility. It was ugly and improvised, but it worked. Sora trained medical personnel from the volunteer ships. Most were civilians with basic first aid knowledge. She turned them into combat medics using techniques that made conventional doctors cringe but saved lives in the field. Forget what you learned in civilian medical training, she told a class of 50 volunteers. In combat, you don't have time for proper procedures. You stabilize, you evacuate, you let the hospital ships do the fancy stuff later. She showed them how to seal wounds with emergency foam, how to perform amputations in the field when necessary, how to keep someone alive for the crucial minutes it took to reach proper care. One volunteer, a former restaurant owner named Ji Su, raised her hand. This seems brutal. It is, Sora agreed, but a brutal medicine that saves 70% of patients is better than a gentle medicine that saves 30%. The coalition finally responded to Minho's transmission. The message was stern and official. He had violated protocols, exceeded his authority, created an unauthorized military force. He was ordered to stand down immediately and return to human-controlled space for disciplinary hearings. Minho deleted the message without replying. Administrator Salver watched the human armada grow with amazement. The Velkari colony, once dying, had become the center of something unprecedented. Humans were coordinating a defense of alien species without being asked, without being paid, without even being thanked by most of those species. Why do they do this? He asked his daughter, Rhea, who'd spent weeks working alongside the humans. Because someone called for help, she replied simply. To humans, that's all the reason they need. In orbit, the growing fleet practiced coordinated maneuvers. Captain Yunji worked with the military ships to develop tactics that civilian vessels could use effectively. They couldn't match military-grade weapons, but they had mass momentum and the willingness to take risks. Ramming speed isn't a tactic, one of the military frigate captains argued during a planning session. It is if you evacuate the crew first and pilot the ship remotely, Yunji countered. We've got plenty of old ships that are worth more as missiles than as transports. The military captain looked horrified at the waste, but he had to admit it would work. Yuna continued monitoring Catherine communications. The parasites were confused. They'd expected easy prey. They'd found an organized resistance that grew stronger every day. Their harvest operations were failing. They are adapting, she reported to Captain Minho. Changing tactics, targeting smaller colonies, trying to hit multiple places at once to spread us thin. Then we adapt faster, Minho replied. That's what humans do. He reorganized the volunteer fleet into rapid response groups. Each group had a mix of military and civilian vessels capable of reaching a distress call within hours instead of days. They practiced emergency deployment until it became routine. The first test came when a mining colony in Sector 841 sent a distress signal. Cathim forces were landing. The nearest response group, led by Captain Yunji and the Buso-san runner, jumped to faster than light immediately. They arrived to find 2 Catherine harvester ships beginning their operation. The human ships didn't wait for the parasites to react. Kungu's Deep Horizon rammed one harvester ship at full speed, its reinforced mining hull punching through the Kithim vessel's organic armor. Both ships were destroyed, but Kyungu and his crew had evacuated in escape pods minutes before impact. The second harvester tried to flee. It didn't make it. A dozen human ships pursued it, firing everything they had until the alien vessel was a drifting wreck. The mining colony was saved with minimal casualties. The humans had arrived in time. Word of the rescue spread. More colonies started requesting human protection. The coalition was furious but helpless. They couldn't protect these remote settlements themselves, and they couldn't order the humans to stop without looking cruel and incompetent. Some coalition species started to reconsider their view of humans. The Velkhari weren't alone in being saved by Deathworlders anymore. A dozen different species now owed their lives to human intervention. In the Tux Missal, Marines and civilians ate together, sharing stories and strategies. The informal atmosphere would have horrified coalition military observers, but it worked. Everyone knew their role. Everyone trusted each other. Junho sat with a civilian volunteer named Yejin, teaching her how to make improvised explosives from common chemicals. In a proper military, this would be classified information. Among humans, it was survival knowledge worth sharing. The key is the mixture ratio, he explained. Too much oxidizer and it's unstable. Too little and it won't ignite. Is this legal? Yejin asked. Probably not, but it'll save your life if Catherine board your ship. Across the room, Hana cleaned her rifle while explaining long-range shooting to a merchant captain. Wind doesn't matter in space, but you have to account for relative velocity. This was the human way. No rigid hierarchies, no secrets kept from those who needed to know. Everyone shared knowledge because everyone might need it to survive. Major Tahun reviewed the growing network of protected colonies. They'd established defensive positions around 47 settlements so far. More were being added every day as volunteer ships arrived. We're spread thin, Curie warned. If the Kim hit multiple targets at once, we might not be able to respond to all of them. Then we'll respond to as many as we can. Tahun replied, and make sure every colony has basic defenses so they can hold out until help arrives. He'd started training locals in self-defense. Most coalition species had never considered fighting back against attackers. They relied on shields and automated defenses. Humans taught them that sometimes you needed to pick up a weapon and stand your ground. Back on the Velkhari colony, Jiwan watched a group of Yungari practicing with basic firearms under Sora's supervision. Captain Minho stood on the bridge of the taiga and faced a choice. His tactical officer, Hyan, had identified the fleeing Catherine ships on long-range sensors. 3 of them damaged and running. The human fleet could catch them in a few hours and finish them off. But behind him, on the planet below, 5,000 Velkhari survivors needed help. The colony's infrastructure was destroyed. Water purification plants were offline. Medical facilities were overwhelmed. Without immediate aid, people would die from thirst and untreated injuries within days. Sir, the Catherine are getting away, Hun said quietly. Minho looked at the tactical display, then at the planet on the view screen. Let them run. We came here to save lives, not count kills. All ships begin rescue operations. The human fleet moved into position. Every transport shuttle, every cargo bay, every available space was prepared to receive refugees. The Tuk alone could hold 1,000 people if they packed them in tight. On the ground, Major Tahan organized the evacuation. His Marines moved through the ruins, searching for survivors who were too injured or scared to come out of hiding. They found Velkharian basement in collapsed buildings in underground tunnels. Each one was carefully brought to the evacuation points. Easy, Sora said to an elderly Velkhari man she found trapped under rubble. His leg was crushed, probably beyond saving. We're going to get you out of here. Leave me, the old one wheezed. Save the young ones. That's not how humans work, Sora replied, signaling for help. We take everyone we can. Janho and 2 other Marines lifted the rubble carefully. Sora injected the Velkhari with painkillers and stabilized his leg as best she could. Then they carried him to a shuttle on a stretcher. The first shuttles arrived at the tag loaded with refugees. The Velkhari stumbled out into the hangar bay, looking around with wide, frightened eyes. Everything about the human ship was wrong to them. Too dark, too cramped, too many hard edges. It was designed by predators for predators. But the crew welcomed them anyway. Ensign Minjae, who worked in the quartermaster's office, showed families to temporary quarters. Cookban opened the galley and started preparing food that Velkhari could eat. Even the gruff engineers like Doyen helped carry supplies and set up temporary shelters. Jiwan set up a triage center in one of the cargo bays. The wounded kept coming, more than her small medical team could handle. She made quick decisions about who needed treatment first, working faster than she ever had in training. A young Velkari female watched her work. She was Selvar's daughter, one of the colony administrators. Her name was unpronounceable to human tongues, so she'd started calling herself Reyna. "Your methods are strange," Rhea observed, as Giwan operated on a patient using tools that looked more like mechanics equipment than surgical instruments. "Human medicine developed differently," Giwan explained, not looking up from her work. "Most species advanced so fast they never needed to learn rough emergency procedures. Humans spent thousands of years patching each other up with primitive tools. We got good at improvising. Is that why you use fire to sterilize wounds?" "Plasma cutters, actually. But yes, same principle. Heat kills infection." Rhea hesitated, then asked the question that had been bothering her. "Why do you help us? Your people traveled 4 days to reach us. You fought creatures that terrify the entire galaxy. You took casualties. What do you gain from this?" Chi finally looked up at her. "Nothing. We gain nothing. Except knowing we did the right thing. That is all. That's everything." Over the next 3 days, the human fleet worked non-stop. Engineers from every ship went down to the planet to restore basic infrastructure. Doyen led teams that rebuilt water purification systems using salvaged parts and creative improvisation. "This isn't up to Coalition standards," admitted technician Bora, as she welded together mismatched components. "Coalition standards require 6 months of planning and certified parts," Doyen replied. "Our standard is, does it work? And yes, it does. They brought the water system online in 2 days instead of the 6 months Coalition engineers would have taken. It was ugly, inefficient, and violated a dozen safety codes, but it produced clean water, and that was what mattered." Other human ships started arriving. Captain Minho's call to arms had reached dozens of vessels across the sector. They came from everywhere: military frigates, merchant haulers, even small private ships crewed by retired veterans. One of the first to arrive was the Bususan Runner, a massive cargo ship captained by a woman named Yunji. She'd been a Marine once before retiring to run freight. Her ship's cargo holds were full of supplies. "Heard you needed help," she said when she contacted the Took. "I've got food, medical supplies, and 40 crew members who used to be military. Where do you want us?" "Everywhere," Minho replied gratefully. "Thank you, Captain." More ships meant more help. The Velkari colony that had been on the verge of death began to stabilize. Temporary housing went up. Medical care improved. Children who'd been hiding in the dark started to play again, watched over by human Marines who were surprisingly gentle despite their fearsome appearance. Sora found herself teaching Velkari medical students. They'd lost most of their trained doctors to the Kathram harvest. The young ones who remained needed to learn fast. "Human emergency medicine is different from what you're used to," she explained to a class of 10 nervous students. "You've been taught to wait for diagnostic equipment, to plan carefully, to use the most advanced techniques. Forget all that. Sometimes you have to act on instinct and incomplete information." She demonstrated on a training dummy, showing them how to stabilize trauma injuries with limited equipment. The Velkari watched with a mixture of horror and fascination. "This is barbaric," one student said. "This is effective," Sora corrected. "Barbaric medicine that saves lives is better than civilized medicine that arrives too late." In the command center, Yuna continued monitoring communications. She'd discovered something disturbing. The Catherine hadn't just attacked this colony. Over the past 6 months, at least 15 other remote settlements had sent distress signals. Most had never been answered. She brought her findings to Captain Minho. "Sir, the Catherine have been systematically targeting colonies on the Coalition's fringes, places too far from major shipping lanes to get quick help." Minho studied the map she'd compiled. Red markers showed attacked colonies. How many survivors? Unknown. Probably not many. The Kim are efficient, and the Coalition knew about this. They received the distress calls. Some are months old, still being reviewed by committees. Minho felt anger rising in his chest. All these deaths, all this suffering, while bureaucrats debated jurisdiction and proper procedures. Send this data to every human ship in the fleet and to Coalition Command. Make sure they understand what their delays cost. That evening, Administrator Salvar requested a meeting with Minho. They met in a temporary office set up in one of the colony's surviving buildings. The Velkari was old and tired, his fur gray with stress. "I wanted to thank you personally," Silvar said. "You saved my people. You saved my daughter." "We did what anyone should do," Minho replied. "But no one else did. We sent that distress call to the coalition. We waited. No one came. Only you. We heard you calling. How could we not answer?" Selvar studied the human captain. "Your people are feared across the galaxy. Do you know why? Because we're violent. Because we come from a death world? No. We fear you because you make decisions without hesitation. Other species think, plan, debate. Humans act. That is terrifying to creatures who have never needed to be decisive." Minho considered this. "Is that why the coalition limits human military forces?" "Of course. You are too dangerous to trust with real power." Selvar's ears drooped. "But now I understand that sometimes danger is exactly what is needed. My people are alive because you were willing to be dangerous." The conversation stayed with Minho long after Sailbar left. Humanity had spent centuries trying to be less threatening, more civilized, more acceptable to the other species. But maybe the galaxy didn't need more civilized species. Maybe it needed someone willing to answer the calls that others ignored. By the end of the first week, the Velkari colony was functional again. Not thriving, not healed, but alive. The human fleet had done in 7 days what coalition aid would have taken months to accomplish. More human ships continued arriving. Some brought supplies, others brought weapons. Word of the Catherine's return was spreading, and humans were responding the way they always had to existential threats. They were preparing for war. In the medical bay, young Reyna helped Jiwan treat patients. She'd learned more in a week than in a year of conventional schooling. Human medicine was rough, but it worked. "Will you stay?" she asked Jiwan to help us rebuild for a while. Jiwan said, "But there are other colonies that might need help. Other places where the Cathrim might attack. You will hunt them." "Yes, that's what you do with parasites. You don't negotiate with them or try to understand them. You eliminate them." Rhea thought about this. Such direct thinking, such certainty. No wonder other species found humans frightening. But watching Giwan save another life with her brutal, efficient methods, Reyna thought that maybe frightening wasn't the same as wrong. The Catherines sent their heavy assault forms just before dawn. These weren't the simple harvesters or soldiers. These were war beasts, creatures bred specifically for breaking through defenses. Each one stood 5 meters tall, covered in natural armor plates that could stop most energy weapons. Major Tahan watched them approach through his armor's sensors. 12 of the massive creatures moving in a coordinated pattern toward the civilian shelter. Behind him, 2,000 Velkari waited, hoping the human marines could protect them. "Junho, you ready?" Tahun asked over the squad channel. "Always," the demolitions expert replied from his position 3 blocks away. The war beasts entered the kill zone. Juno triggered the explosives he'd spent all night planting. The entire street erupted. Buildings that were already damaged collapsed inward, tons of rubble falling on the Cathim monsters. 3 went down immediately, crushed under the debris. The others kept coming. They were tough and determined. "Hana, take the ones on the left," Tahan ordered. "Everyone else, focus fire on the right group." Hana's rifle cracked from her position on top of a grain storage tower. Her bullets were specially designed for armor penetration. Each shot hit a war beast in the same spot, the small gap where their head plates met their body armor. One by one, they fell. The Marines on the ground opened up with everything they had: plasma rifles, railguns, old-fashioned chemical explosive rockets. The Catham war beasts were strong, but they'd evolved to fight prey species that ran away. They'd never faced concentrated military firepower before. In orbit, Captain Minho coordinated with the ground teams while fighting his own battle. The 3 remaining hive ships had changed tactics. They were trying to break through the human fleet, to bombard the surface. "They're going scorched earth," Han reported. "If they can't harvest the colony, they'll destroy it, so we can't have it either." "Like hell they will," Minho said. Frigates form a wall between the hive ships and the planet. Everyone else hit them from the sides. The human ships moved with precision. This kind of coordination required trust and practice. Humans had both. They'd spent thousands of years fighting each other before reaching space, learning every dirty trick of warfare. The hive ships fired their weapons, trying to blast through the frigate screen, but the smaller human ships were fast and maneuverable. They scattered, reformed, always staying between the Kim and the planet below. Meanwhile, the and her sister ships circled around the hive ships, firing into their flanks. The Cathrim shields held, but they were weakening. Each hit drained their power reserves a little more. Doyen monitored the engineering displays with growing concern. The Taguk was taking damage too. Her shields were at 60%. Several weapon systems were offline. They were pushing the ship past safe limits. "Captain, we can't maintain this pace much longer," he reported. "We need to end this soon or fall back for repairs." "We don't fall back." Minho said, "Find me a weakness in those ships. There has to be something." Back on the planet's surface, the Velkari were learning what made humans dangerous. It wasn't just their weapons or their armor. It was their thinking. Sergeant Hana had run out of special ammunition for her rifle. So, she switched to standard rounds and started targeting the ground near the war beasts instead of the creatures themselves. The bullets kicked up dust and debris, creating clouds that blocked the Catherine's vision. Blinded, the war beasts stumbled into traps the Marines had set. Some fell into hastily dug pits. Others triggered proximity mines. The humans were using the environment as a weapon, something the Cathim didn't expect. Sora worked in the shelter, treating wounded Marines and Velkari side by side. A young Marine named Wu Jin had taken shrapnel from a Catherine weapon. The wounds were infected with something that the medical scanner didn't recognize. "This is breaking down his tissues," she said to the Velkari doctor working beside her. "It's like his own body is digesting itself." "That is how Catherine harvest," the doctor explained, her voice shaking. "Their weapons begin the process. Even if you escape, you still become food." Sora looked at the infection spreading through Wu Jin's arm. A coalition doctor would probably recommend amputation, the safe and certain solution, but humans didn't always take the safe path. "Get me a plasma cutter," she ordered. "We're going to burn it out." The procedure was brutal. Sora used the plasma cutter to carefully burn away the infected tissue, working faster than the infection could spread. Wu Jin screamed despite the painkillers, but he stayed conscious watching her work. "Crazy human medicine," he gasped between gritted teeth. "Crazy human patient," Sora shot back. Anyone else would have passed out by now. She saved his arm. The Velkari doctor watched in amazement. This wasn't elegant medicine. It was desperate improvisation, but it worked. "You are willing to hurt in order to heal," the doctor observed. "Sometimes that's what survival requires," Sora replied, already moving to the next patient. In orbit, Hun finally found what Captain Minho had asked for. "Sir, I've been analyzing their power distribution. The hive ships are drawing massive amounts of energy to maintain shields while also powering their weapons and life support, but there's a spike every time they launch more ground forces. They're pulling power from somewhere to open the launch bays," Minho realized. "Which system gets weakened? Looks like propulsion, just for a few seconds, but they basically stop moving." Minho smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. All ships knew targeting pattern. Wait for the hive ships to launch forces, then target their engines. Let's make sure they can't run when they realize they're losing. The human fleet shifted formation. They stopped trying to break through the shields and instead waited. Patience was something humans had learned from hunting back when they were still figuring out how to make fire. A hive ship opened its launch bay. The moment its engines dimmed, every human ship in range fired on that exact spot. The railgun rounds punched through weakened shields and tore into the propulsion system. The hive ship shuddered and started to drift, unable to control its movement. It was crippled. Again, Minho ordered, "Get the next one." The Catherine were learning, but too slowly. They didn't have experience fighting enemies who studied and adapted. In their long history, they'd always been the hunters, never the hunted. The second hive ship fell the same way, then the third. On the ground, Major Tihan received the update from orbit. The hive ships are disabled. No more reinforcements coming. Then let's finish this, he said. All squads, advance. Push them back to their ships. The Marines moved forward in coordinated groups. They used buildings for cover, moved in short sprints, covered each other's advances. It was urban warfare, a type of combat humans had perfected through countless brutal wars on Earth. The Cathim ground forces tried to hold their positions, but they were designed for corralling scared civilians, not fighting trained soldiers. Every time they set up a defensive position, Junho would blow it up. Every time they tried to mass their forces, Hana would pick off their leaders. By midday, the Catherine were in full retreat. They abandoned their harvesting equipment, their processing centers, even their wounded. They fled to their grounded transport ships and tried to escape. Should we let them go? Asked Lieutenant Curie, one of Tahun's squad leaders. Tahun thought about the Velkari they'd found in the processing centers, half digested, begging for death. He thought about the children who had watched their parents dragged away. He thought about the distress call that had brought them here. No, he said, we don't let them go. We make sure they can't do this to anyone else. The Marines hit the grounded ships with everything they had. Anti-vehicle weapons, explosives, even a few old-fashioned Molotov cocktails that Junho made from salvaged chemicals. The Catherine ships burned. In the shelter, the Velkari heard the explosions and saw the smoke rising. They heard the human weapons falling silent as the battle ended. Slowly, carefully, they emerged. The city was destroyed. Buildings were collapsed. Streets were torn up. Fires still burned in several districts. But the Catherine were gone. Dead or fled, it didn't matter which. They were gone. Sora stood outside the shelter covered in blood and exhaustion. A young Velkari girl approached her hesitantly. Are we safe now? The child asked. Sora looked at the ruins around them. Safe was a relative term, but the immediate threat was over. Yes, she said. You're safe. We won't let them hurt you again. The girl hugged her. Soon others joined in. They surrounded the Marines, these violent Deathworlders who had saved them, and thanked them in dozens of languages and gestures. Captain Minho watched from orbit as casualty reports came in. 20 Marines dead, 43 wounded. The Tiguk had damage that would take weeks to repair properly. 2 of the frigates were barely operational, but below on the planet, 5,000 Velkari were alive because humans had answered their call. Captain, we're receiving transmissions, Yuna reported. Human ships from across the sector. They heard your call to arms. They're coming to help hunt the Cathim. Minho felt something shift in his chest. Pride, maybe, or purpose. Humanity had spent so long trying to fit into galactic civilization, trying to be less violent, less aggressive, less dangerous. Maybe it was time to embrace what they were. Deathworlders, predators, warriors. And maybe that was exactly what the galaxy needed right now. The Tuk dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Velkari system, and what they saw made even veteran crew members feel sick. The 3 moons that orbited the colony world were dark. Their biodomes, which should have glowed with artificial light, were shattered. Debris floated everywhere. Pieces of civilian transports, parts of buildings, things that Hyan didn't want to identify too closely. Scan for life signs. Captain Minho ordered, his voice tight. Scanning now. Yun worked his console. I'm reading. Wait, there are still survivors on the planet's surface, concentrated in the main city, but there are also massive energy signatures. Ships in low orbit. The view screen shifted to show the planet below. 5 enormous vessels hung over the colony's population centers like vultures. They were organic-looking, all curves and strange protrusions. Their hulls seemed to pulse with a sickly green light. Those matched the historical profiles, Yuna confirmed quietly. They're Cathrim hive ships. In the medical bay, Jiwan pulled up the old files on the Cathrim. What she read made her stomach turn. The Cathim didn't kill for territory or resources in the normal sense. They consumed other species, breaking them down for biological material to grow more Cathrim. They were parasites on a galactic scale. Captain, I'm reading weapons charging on those hive ships, Han reported. They've detected us. Battle stations. Launch all fighters. Get me a firing solution on the nearest hive ship. Minho's voice was calm, but his hands gripped the armrests of his command chair and prepped the marine drop pods. In the barracks, alarms blared. Major Tahan was already suited up in his powered armor. The heavy combat suit made him look twice his normal size, covered in weapons and armor plating. Around him, his marines did the same. "Listen up," Tahun's voice boomed through the bay. "There are civilians down there being processed for food. We're going to get them out. Standard drop pattern. Hit the ground. Establish a perimeter. Locate the survivors." The Marines loaded into drop pods, cramped metal coffins designed to punch through atmosphere and defensive fire. It was a terrifying way to travel, but humans had learned that sometimes the scariest approach was the most effective. 30 seconds to drop, the launch officer announced. Tahun settled into his pod. Next to him was Junho, the demolitions expert, humming an old song from Earth. On his other side was Sora, a combat medic, checking her medical supplies one last time. "Think the Catherine know what they're in for?" Junho asked. "They're about to find out," Sora replied. The launch bay doors opened. For a moment, Taihung could see the planet below through the gap. Then the pod's engines fired, and he was thrown back against the restraints as they shot into space. The drop was violent. Catham defensive drones swarmed the pods, firing energy weapons that splashed against the armored hulls. But human engineers had designed these pods to survive re-entry on Deathworlds. Alien weapons barely scratched them. Tahun's pod hit the ground hard, its impact absorber screaming. The door blew off and he was moving, weapon up, scanning for threats. Around him, dozens of other pods were landing. Marines pouring out in coordinated groups. The city was a horror. Buildings were torn open, their contents spilled into the streets. Strange organic machines crawled through the ruins, rounded up terrified Velkari civilians, and herding them toward large processing centers. The air smelled like blood and something worse, something alien and wrong. "Contact," someone shouted. A Catharim soldier emerged from a building. It was massive, easily 3 meters tall with too many limbs, and a mouth that opened sideways. It screeched when it saw the humans. The Marines didn't hesitate. A storm of bullets and plasma fire tore the creature apart. It fell. Icor sprang from dozens of wounds. "Keep moving," Tahun ordered. "Find the civilians." They found them in an underground shelter, hundreds of Velkari packed together in the dark. The aliens were tall and thin with large eyes and delicate features. They looked like prey animals, which made sense because that's exactly what they were to the Catherine. When the Marines burst in, the Velkari screamed. They shrank back from the armored humans, terrified. They'd never seen humans before, only heard stories. Stories that said Deathworlders were dangerous and violent. Sora removed her helmet, showing her face. "We're here to help," she said in carefully practiced Valkyrie. "We heard your distress call." A young Valkyrie, barely more than a child, stared at her. You came, but you are human. You are predators." "Yes," Sora said simply. "And right now, you need predators on your side." She began treating the wounded, while other Marines established a defensive perimeter. Some Velkari had injuries from Catherine capture attempts. Others were just sick from stress and dehydration. Above the city, the space battle raged. The Tayuk and her escorts danced with the hive ships trading fire. The Catharim vessels were powerful, their shields absorbing hit after hit, but Captain Minho had studied the old battles against the Kim. "Wait for them to launch ground forces," he ordered. "They have to drop their shields to deploy. When they do, hit them with everything." Hun watched his tactical display like a hawk. The moment a hive ship's shields flickered to release more ground troops, he fired. Railgun rounds, each one moving at a fraction of light speed, punched through the exposed section of the ship. The hive ship shuddered, green ichor leaking from the wounds. "Direct hit. That one's wounded again," Mino commanded. "Don't give them time to adapt." In the city, more Kathim ground forces arrived. These were different from the soldiers. These were harvesters designed to capture and process prey. They moved on dozens of legs with cages built into their bodies already holding captured. The Marines didn't bother with fancy tactics. Yuno planted charges on a building and brought it down on top of a harvester, crushing it. Hana positioned on a rooftop with a long-range rifle picked off Catherine commanders, causing confusion in their ranks. They're not used to resistance, Tahun observed. They expect their prey to run or hide. We're not prey, Junho said, loading another explosive charge. We're the thing that prey calls when they need saving. The battle continued through the day and into the night. Slowly, the Marines expanded their perimeter, pulling more Valkyrie out of hiding places and bringing them to the shelter. Slowly, the human ships in orbit battered down the hive ships' defenses, but the Kathrim were adapting. They started targeting escape routes instead of just harvesting. They were willing to destroy what they couldn't take. Jiwan worked in a makeshift hospital, treating both Marines and Valkyrie. She'd never seen injuries like the ones the Kathrim caused. Their weapons didn't just kill, they started breaking down flesh for easier harvesting. How do you know how to fix this? A Valkyrie doctor asked, watching Jishwan work on a wounded civilian. We don't, Jishwan admitted, her hands steady as she operated. But on Earth, we learn to improvise. When you don't have perfect solutions, you make do with what you have. She saved the Valkyrie's life using techniques that would make coalition medical professionals faint with horror. Crude, brutal, effective death world medicine. In orbit, the tide was turning. 2 hive ships were badly damaged, leaking atmosphere and retreating. But the other 3 were still fighting, and more Catherine reinforcements were arriving from somewhere deeper in the system. Captain, we have a problem, Yuna reported. I'm detecting signals. The Catherine are calling for more ships. This isn't just one group. This is coordinated. Minho felt his blood run cold. If the Catherine were coordinating attacks, if they had more ships, then this colony wasn't their only target. How many more colonies might they hit? Based on these signals, dozens, maybe hundreds, Minho made a decision. He opened a channel to all human vessels in the region, not just his fleet. This is Captain Minho of the Teuk. We have confirmation that the Keith swarm has returned and is conducting harvesting operations against undefended colonies. Any human vessel receiving this transmission is authorized to engage Catherine forces on site and render aid to species under attack. He ended the transmission and looked at his crew. We're going to save this colony. Then we're going to find every other colony they've hit, and we're going to stop them. The Coalition won't like us acting without authorization, Seojin warned. The Coalition can file a complaint after we save their citizens, Minho replied. On the ground, Major Tahun's Marines held their line as darkness fell. The Kuthim attacked again and again, but each time they met walls of human firepower. Behind those walls, thousands of Valkyrie huddled together, slowly beginning to believe that maybe they would survive. One young Valkyrie, the same one who had spoken to Sora earlier, watched the Marines fight. She saw how they moved, how they worked together, how they put themselves between the civilians and the monsters. They are predators, she whispered to herself, but they are our predators now. The bridge of the Teuk hummed with quiet efficiency as it drifted through the darkness between stars. Captain Minho sat in his command chair, reviewing reports on a holographic display. His crew had been on patrol for 3 months now, watching over the empty sectors that other species considered too boring to monitor. That was fine with him. Humanity had learned patience the hard way. Captain, I'm picking up something strange, Yuna said from her station. The communications officer frowned at her screens, her fingers dancing across the controls. It's an old emergency frequency. Nobody uses these anymore. Minho stood and walked over to her station. Can you clean it up? Yuna worked in silence for a moment, filtering out the static and cosmic interference. Slowly, a voice emerged from the noise. It was high-pitched and trembling with fear. The words came in broken fragments, but the universal translator did its job. Under attack. They came from nowhere, harvesting us like crops. Please, anyone listening, we are dying. The bridge fell silent. Everyone stopped what they were doing. Even the steady beep of the sensor arrays seemed to pause. Origin point? Minho asked quietly. Yun checked his tactical display. Sector 773. That's Valkyrie territory, sir. Agricultural colony. Population around 50,000. Mostly farmers and their families. Distance, 4 days at maximum speed. Minho pulled up the sector map. The Velkari colony was far from any major shipping lanes isolated on purpose. The Velkari were peaceful herbivores who preferred quiet places away from the busy parts of the galaxy. The Galactic Coalition protected the major worlds, but places like this were considered safe enough to ignore. "Play it again," Minho ordered. The message repeated. This time, they could hear screaming in the background, the sound of something tearing through metal. Then the transmission cut to static. "Sir, protocol says we should report this to Coalition Command and wait for instructions," said Jan, his first officer. The older man didn't look happy about it, though. Minho knew the rules. He also knew how the coalition worked. They would form a committee. They would debate jurisdiction. They would ask for more information. By the time they decided to act, everyone in that colony would be dead. "How many ships do we have in the patrol group?" he asked. "The Tuck plus 4 escort frigates and 2 support vessels," Han reported. "All human crews. All ready for combat. Send a message to all ships. Tell them what we heard. Ask them if they want to follow protocol or save lives." Seojan smiled. "I can already tell you what they'll say, Captain." He was right. Within minutes, all 6 ship captains sent back the same response. They were ready to move. Set course for the Velkari colony. Maximum speed battle stations. Minho returned to his command chair. "And send a message to Coalition Command. Tell them we intercepted a distress call and are responding. They can catch up later." The Tuk and her escort fleet turned as one, their engines flaring bright blue as they accelerated. In the engineering section, Doyen watched his displays carefully. Pushing the engines this hard for 4 days straight would stress every system on the ship. He started making calculations, figuring out which parts would need replacing when this was over. "Think we'll make it in time?" asked his assistant, a young engineer named Bora. "We'd better," Doyen said. "I'm not pushing these engines to redline just to arrive at a graveyard." In the medical bay, Jiwan prepared for casualties. She pulled up everything the database had on Velkari biology. Their internal organs were different from humans, but the basic principles were the same. She could work with this. "Why do we always end up doing this?" asked Nurse Minjae, helping her set up surgical equipment. "Because someone has to," Janu replied. "And everyone else is too civilized to get their hands dirty." Down in the Marine barracks, Major Tahan briefed his troops. 200 Marines listened as he explained what little they knew about the situation. "We don't know what we're flying into," he said. "Could be pirates, could be something worse. But there are 50,000 farmers down there who grow food for half the sector. They've never hurt anyone. Now someone's killing them." The Marines checked their weapons. They'd trained for every kind of combat scenario humans could imagine, and humans had imagined quite a lot over their violent history. Whatever was waiting at that colony, they would be ready. "Rules of engagement," asked Sergeant Hanna. "Protect the civilians. Eliminate the threat." In that order, Tahun pulled up a tactical map. "We go in hard and fast. No warning shots. No negotiations. If they're harvesting people, they don't get to surrender." The Marines nodded. This was why humanity scared the other species in the coalition. Humans understood violence in a way that peaceful species didn't. They knew when mercy was wrong. As the fleet raced through faster than light space, Yuna continued analyzing the distress signal. She found fragments they'd missed in the first pass. References to harvesting machines and hive ships, words that made her blood run cold. She took her findings to Captain Minho in his ready room. "Sir, I think I know what we're dealing with," she said, showing him her analysis. "These terms, this technology, it matches historical records of the Kathrim swarm." Minho's face went pale. Every spacefaring species knew about the Kathrim, even if only from history lessons. 300 years ago, they'd terrorized the galaxy, consuming entire populations for biomass. The coalition had driven them to extinction in a rare moment of unified military action. "The coalition are dead," Minho said. "The coalition made sure of that. Maybe they missed some, or maybe the coalition are better at hiding than we thought." Minho stood and walked to the window, looking out at the streaking stars. If Yuna was right, they weren't flying toward a pirate raid or a rogue military action. They were flying toward a nightmare that was supposed to be extinct. "Keep this quiet for now," he said. "No point in creating panic, but tell Doyan to make sure every weapon system is operating at peak efficiency. If we're really fighting the Cathim, we'll need everything we've got." Yuna saluted and left. Mino stood alone in his ready room, thinking about the choice he'd made. The Coalition would be furious that he'd acted without authorization. Some species would call it typical human aggression. More evidence that Deathworlders couldn't be trusted, but that distress call kept playing in his mind. The fear in that voice, the screaming. Humanity had spent centuries trying to prove they weren't barbaric warmongers. They'd followed Coalition rules, accepted limitations on their military, worked hard to be seen as civilized. Maybe being civilized meant different things to different species. For the prey species of the Coalition, civilization meant committees and protocols, and careful deliberation. For humans, it meant something simpler. When someone screamed for help, you answered. The Tega raced onward through the dark, carrying 200 Marines and a crew that refused to let bureaucracy count bodies. In 4 days, they would arrive at the Velcari colony. Whatever they found there, they would face it the human way, with fury, courage, and the absolute refusal to abandon those in need.